Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I wish to rebut a few of the comments made by the previous speaker, but right now I'm currently lost in Region 8. So, Mr. Speaker, it's with much pride that I humbly rise to support Budget 2021 being presented to this National Assembly under the theme, A Path to Recovery, Economic Dynamism, and Resilience, to a whopping sum of $383 billion, financed with no new taxes. In the same breath, Mr. Speaker, I join the many speakers before me in congratulating the team from the Ministry of Finance and the Honorable Dr. Ashni Kumar Singh for this well thought out and compiled budget. In the words of Dr. Ashni Singh, and I quote, Budget 2021 seeks to ensure that we recover as a country both from 2020 and the last 5 years of trauma. It puts in place the policies needed to catalyze rapid economic growth in the near and medium term, and it lays the foundation needed to ensure that growth is not transitory but is sustainable for the long term. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 is the second step towards achieving our manifesto commitment to the Guyanese people, since billions were already expended in our emergency budget 2020. And already, Mr. Speaker, the economy is growing, businesses are surviving amidst the pandemic, and the country is progressing. Mr. Speaker, I wish to rebut Mr. Mahipal, Honourable Member, in his presentation where he said that at no time the REOs worked against the elected official. Mr. Speaker, in 2019, as an elected vice chair of the RDC Region Number 1, we were completely denied access to line item 6211, expenses specific to the agency earmarked for the RDC's functions, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member also compared the allocation in 6211 for Region Number 4 compared to Region Number 1. May I remind, Mr. Speaker, the member that the line item 6211 in Region 1 caters for Tushao and senior councillors' stipend, of which, Mr. Speaker, an annual sum of $8,640,000 for a total of 24 Tushaos and 10 senior councillors to a annual sum of $2.4 million is also included in the 6211 line item, Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Local Government, the previous Minister of Local Government, was more concerned with balkanizing the country and imposing regional flags within a nation when our sovereignty at that time was under threat. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2020 saw investments in all sectors of the country's economy, especially, Mr. Speaker, in the sector closest to my heart, investment in Amerindian development. And sad to say, Mr. Speaker, the sector that was the most neglected under the APNU-AFC's term in office. Many of the speakers on the other side of the House made reference to hinterland development, and the communities in focus were Mabaruma, Madia, Letem, and Bartica. Mr. Speaker, these areas alone, it's not the hinterland. What about villages like Cariaco and the entire Barama River, who have never seen any minister of the APNU-AFC government, except for one who went to neighboring Yakishur to campaign days before the elections? Mr. Speaker, yes. Mr. Speaker, already in this pandemic, an allocation of $1.7 billion was disbursed across Amerindian villages across the 10 regions for villagers to execute a project of their choice in an effort to help stimulate the local village economy at a time when we desperately need this intervention. Mr. Speaker, villages are buzzing with activities as the COVID-19 relief grant was given to complement the annual presidential grant, an initiative too that was birthed under the PPPC administration. Mr. Speaker, I wish to remind Honorable Dawn Hastings when her presentation asked, what could $10 million do for villages? Mr. Speaker, I wish to invite that member to take a look at the brilliant proposals made by village councils, and as a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, many village councils are doing way better than the previous government, for they failed to implement any new CDP where villages had access to $5 million under this project. Mr. Speaker, under the COVID-19 relief grant, villages across Region 1 benefited from a total of $542 million, Honorable Member Ronald Cox. Region 2, $105 million. Region 3, $23 million. Region 4, $47 million. Region 5, $15 million. 6, $30 million. 7, $216 million. Region 8, $208 million. Region 9, Honorable Member Mr. Henry, $454 million, and Region 10, $92 million. That, Mr. Speaker, is an investment made by a caring government, and that is just in addition to the 100 tractors that were procured in Budget 2020 to be distributed among villages across the hinterland that have not benefited from a tractor or trailer. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 caters for the chipper and plow to accompany these 100 tractors, so our farmers too can benefit from the resources of this country. Further, Mr. Speaker, the ADF accounts for $1.5 billion in Budget 2021 and contains projects for every sector, ranging from women, youth, sports, agriculture, education, farm-to-market roads, to name a few. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, that my indigenous colleagues on the other side, with the exception of Mr. Schuman, will not say no to this development. Then seek to justify their actions like they did before 2015, when the then combined opposition in the parliament mercilessly massacred the Amerindian Development Fund, giving us $1, and as a result, Mr. Speaker, myself and other young Amerindians and other leaders had to take to the streets in front of the parliament building protesting for them to release our budget. Where much to our dismay, Mr. Speaker, counter-protesters sent by the APNU-AFC lined the streets, hurling racial and vulgar comments to deter us, Mr. Speaker. But we stood tall like a tree planted by the riverside. We did not move. Mr. Speaker, evidently, like any other grouping, we too hold a special place in this inclusive government. Mr. Speaker, the young, vibrant, energetic, and efficient President, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali, in his powerful inaugural presentation to this House, dedicated time to highlight our government's views on the development of Amerindians. And I'm certain that his presentation and the projects we have started to implement and those that will be executed in Budget 2021 have left the indigenous representatives in this House with nothing much to bring to the floor, since many of the interventions are already in motion. And I know that many of them have now resorted to being, for example, the shadow Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, the President in his speech committed to the updating of the Amerindian Act after consultation with every Amerindian community, something that the APNU-AFC failed to do with 2 ministers and demitted office without leaving any paper trail of any work that was done. Mr. Speaker, the President committed to improving the lives of Amerindians by improving education, health facilities, and housing and infrastructure development. Already, Mr. Speaker, there is $630 million to expedite the Amerindian land titling project, again which the APNU-AFC failed miserably to make roads into. Mr. Speaker, this budget seeks to remove duties on ATVs for use in the hinterland, a welcome initiative, especially for those of us living in the mountains, where this is often our best or only mode of transportation. Mr. Speaker, In Budget 2021, the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs has earmarked 9 ATVs for use in villages in Region 8, which were forsaken by the APNU AFC. And no, Mr. Speaker, Madia is not Region 8, Parmakatoy is not Region 8. Mr. Speaker, there are ATVs earmarked, 4 ATVs earmarked for Region 9. There are 3 buses for Region 1, and there's also boat and engines for a few of the riverine communities. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 is fulfilling the commitment made in our manifesto to return the YEAP or the CSO program, which was vindictively disbanded by the previous government, taking bread out of the mouth of 2,000 young people across the hinterland, and then replaced with haze, which has been inactive, mind you, inactive for at least 1 year before they were catapulted into the opposition. Then to have the honorable member, Don Hastings, come to this house to ask us to keep the HASTE program, which they themselves could not keep or maintain as a government. Not to mention the millions unaccounted for under the HASTE program. Shame, shame, shame. Mr. Speaker, in Budget 2021, $820 million is to be utilized for the execution of the CSO YEAP program, where youths from 213 villages will be trained in various disciplines. And this training, Mr. Speaker, does not cater for training in oil and gas, training in climate change, tourism, ICT, and also agro-processing, of which Amerindians will also benefit from under this inclusive government. In addition to this, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs budget caters for intervention for women and youths in the form of additional grants for economic venture. Mr. Speaker, things are happening in Guyana. Yes, things are happening. Already, we have disbursed our uniform allowance to every child in the public school for 2020. Already, there has been an increase in old age pension. Already, we have received $25,000 per household, and yes, the pink slip for phase 2. We have already received $15,000, in 2021 budget, we will receive $15,000 cash grant for every child in the public school. Vaccination for COVID-19 has already been given to our frontline workers who risk their lives daily on the front line to serve us, for which we are extremely grateful. Mr. Speaker, unprecedented development across the hinterland. Already in our emergency budget, over $300 million was spent to upgrade hinterland roads. And in budget 2021, in excess of $400 million will be spent to continue where we left off. And as I speak, Mr. Speaker, I cannot wait to return to my home village, where I will be stepping out on a spanking new concrete road in the Santa Rosa Village, Muruka subregion, region number 1. Mr. Speaker, I note that the honorable geographical member for Region 1 didn't say much with regards to representation for his constituency. And the reason for this is quite simple, Mr. Speaker. We have been doing our job as a government, and as a result, the opposition is becoming irrelevant. And thus, I encourage them to reflect on the well-known local saying, if you can't beat them, then you join them. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member made reference to agriculture development and lamented that the sums allocated were too small, and it makes me wonder whether the member was asleep for the 5 years his government was in office, when the support for Acacia ants, bait, or poison was taken from our people, and that, Mr. Speaker, is returned in budget 2021. May I gently remind the member that the Minister of Agriculture then never visited the agriculture communities in Region 1. But then again, Mr. Speaker, after a certain age, our movements become limited. Mr. Speaker, The regional budget for 2021 Agricultural Development Program caters for the empowering of 100 acres of farmland in the St. Anselm Village, Berima River. Mr. Speaker, no farmland, none, was surrounded by the APNU AFC government in Region 1. To add, Mr. Speaker, the poultry pens that the honourable member alluded to are earmarked for the 3 resident schools in Matakai, Moruko, and Mabruma to aid in the school's agricultural program. Mr. Speaker, in
Honourable
budget...
member, you will need an extension.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask for an extension for the honourable member for 5 minutes to conclude her presentation.
Thank you, honourable member.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Shearer, honourable member, you may proceed.
in budget 2021, the Kamaka District Hospital will be retrofitted to accommodate a theatre and an ICU fully furnished with operating tables, theatre lights, backup, outlets, and gas and vacuum system. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, there is the construction of an infectious disease building and an MCH building at the said hospital. We will also be constructing a maternal waiting home for the Moruko sub-region, all in an effort to make our mothers safe and comfortable with the ultimate goal of reducing maternal and child deaths. Mr. Speaker, there is also the construction of a vaccination cold storage unit at the Mabruma and the Port Kaituma Hospital. Mr. Speaker, upgrading of electricity. The coalition government promised 24 hours electricity to the town of Mabruma, and they did not deliver. Since assuming office, Mr. Speaker, we have moved the supply from 16 to 24 hours in Mabruma and from 9 to 15 hours in the Moruko sub-region. And in budget 2021, we will also establish new grids at Kamwata Mabruma and Kamwata Moruko. Mr. Speaker, we will construct schools in Tasawini in the Matakai sub-region, Yarakita in the Mabruma sub-region. We'll also extend Santa Rosa Secondary, St. Nicholas Primary, Hostorora Primary, Matthews Ridge Primary. In addition, we'll construct laundry buildings at the Santa Rosa Secondary and the Port Kaituma Secondary Dormitory. Mr. Speaker, I think that now you understand why the honourable member could not make a meaningful representation, because it is all registered in budget 2021 if it was not done in budget 2020. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to close by making mention of His Excellency's speech at the opening ceremony of the 12th Parliament on February 11th. And he said, and I quote, "As the President of Guyana and the head of government, my credo and the credo of this government is nation building. The key word of my government is oneness. The essential character of my government is inclusion. Stop being defined by race. Stop being defined by politics. Start being defined by our one nationality and by our common love for our country. Let us lift it up, and by doing so, let us lift up each other and ourselves." End of quote. Budget 2021 is an exceptional and comprehensive document that, when implemented, will reflect one Guyana. Join me and support this budget, my friends on the other side. Mr. Speaker, I thank you and I commend this budget to this honourable House.